Record.
All right. Looks like a lot of you are joining us, so let's introduce our show. This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word. Welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer, Courtney, and I discuss a book each week from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum with you. This is a book club for lovers of the Word made flesh. It's Thursday, January 5th, 2023, and I'm Leigh Bortins. In 1970, when I was 8 years old, I had an extraordinary opportunity. My school was unable to provide an adequate teacher for me. So my mother had the principal put me in an empty classroom with two other young girls who were voracious readers, and they just let us read every day, all day long, whatever we wanted to read. Jennifer, how about you?
Yeah, I had a similar experience. My third grade teacher when we would finish our work early, our privilege for finishing the work early was to go to a learning station and pull out more worksheets to do. And I didn't really feel like that was a privilege. So I went up to her desk one day and said, could I read? The library is just across the way. And in those days we had open classrooms, so you could see the library from our classroom. And there was this lovely rowboat that they put cushions in and made it into a little reading nook. And I just said, I promise I'll sit right there and I'll read, and I won't move beyond selecting my book for the day. And she graciously allowed me to do that. And I had a delightful year, finishing my work quickly so that I could go sit in the rowboat and read.
So the best thing about our public school experiences was when we were just left alone to our own devices. Sounds like homeschooling. All right, so this month's book club highlights resources for our upcoming Scribbler at Home, which is called Recipes from Lifelong Learners. It's an activity book. And so to go along with that as our theme for the month, we're going to be discussing a couple of other books: Old World Echoes, Exploring the Heavens with Uncle Paul, Senators of Rome, and one of my favorites, The Dad's Guide to Classical Education, because it's by my son and CEO of Classical Conversations, Robert Bortins. The actual Scribblers at Home curriculum will be for sale soon, but it's not quite ready yet. And so we just wanted to use this month of January, when we're all getting back into our schooling and into our winter blahs sometimes happening, to introduce an exciting new product that we were going to be working on, or delivering. So tonight, though, we're going to be talking about Old World Echoes, and we have a really good opportunity tonight because the actual editor compiler of Old World Echoes is our own Jennifer Courtney, who is my co-host on this show. And so I'm really excited about this compilation of ancient stories that she curated and sharing more of it with you. Jennifer, why don't you introduce the book to us? I mean, yeah, so you're telling me a little bit about some other people, right? First,
yeah,
so
I think I was just thinking about, as we started off our book club session, just the idea of reading itself. And we know that reading can get blasted a bit in this age of images and fast moving images. And so as I was thinking about the idea of having a book club and trying to encourage more of us to read, I went all the way back to Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I think this is really an important thought for us as Christian readers. He says, the God of the Jews was to exist in the Word and through the Word, an unprecedented conception requiring the highest order of abstract thinking. So when we lose our ability to read, we lose that ability to think about the word. And then the other thing he says not long after that in his introduction to the book is that you can know a culture by their books that they read and by the conversations they have. And I just thought that was so apt for us tonight. And as we go through this series, we're going to be known by the books we read and the conversations we have about them.
Right, and that's really great. And so whether it's Neil Postman from 1984 or these ancient books for our families that ancient stories that Jennifer's put together, hopefully we're all going to just appreciate that the word and words aptly spoken really are like just precious treasure in settings of silver. So in this particular book club, we're going to discuss mostly fiction and a lot of it older literature because it's classics. But if you want to participate in my book club about nonfiction books, join me for Unfragmented with my co-host Kevin Novak. That's actually following the show. It'll be 8 p.m. on Thursday nights. Kevin and I, instead of discussing a book a week like we're doing in the Words Not Spoken book club, we're discussing a book a month because they're going to tackle a little bit more difficult ideas there. And then for those of you that are eager to see more of the unseen, join me and Kirsty Gilpin at 8 p.m. on Mondays for book discussions around the Math Map curriculum, which is being piloted now in Classical Conversations and will be out soon. For those of you that feel not so confident teaching math or even just, doing math problems yourself, we're going to provide some inspiration to help you see how math glorifies God and how beautiful it is. So, Jennifer, you introduced us to Postman and you're the author of this book. So besides being a writer, you're obviously a lifelong reader. Why do you say it's important to read fiction, particularly in this day and age when everybody's reading Twitters and short articles and they have a hard time reading more than 5 or 6 pages at a time?
Yeah, I think one reason is that our shared stories are what bind our culture together. And so that might be for Christians, the stories of the Bible. For citizens of the country, it might be patriotic stories of heroes. But for us as humans, it's those shared stories from fiction that show us that human nature is the same as it's always been. And it shows us how to be compassionate toward one another. And so that leads me to my second reason, which is that reading fiction cultivates our moral imaginations and the moral imagination of our kiddos. It strengthens us to make good choices, to resist temptations, to be empathetic with one another, and to do the hard things when we read those fictional stories.
So, one of the things that I found when I started to have bad eyesight a few years ago is I couldn't read as much. And I really did begin to be unable to hold on to ideas and wait to analyze them and have opinions. And I started wondering, like, what is wrong with me? And I realized I wasn't reading as much as I had been. And reading, of course, forces you to get through hundreds of pages before you make an opinion. Mm-hmm. So I just, appreciate what you said. And I hope that the folks listening with us today and will participate in a little bit. But first, we want to let you know we're going to have a segment that we're calling Word Hoard. And Jennifer's going to explain that to us. And it's something that you can participate in as the book club progresses. So what's a word hoard, Jennifer?
Oh, I just am delighted by discovering this word. And it's a word I just discovered this year. I was listening to a podcast about medieval poets, and the medieval bards didn't have Google. And so they had to store up treasures of words that they could use in their storytelling. And so it was a word in Old English that was word hoard. And I just loved the idea. And so I was sharing that with Stephanie Meter, who's a writer on my team. And we were also talking about how Shakespeare has this huge vocabulary and how he added so many words to the English language. And she was really inspired by our conversation to start her own word hoard and learn a new rich word every week. And she even sometimes blogs about them. So I'm just excited about this opportunity on our book club to collect words together and store up treasures.
So let's hear the word for this week, and then we'll explain to our audience what they can do to help us gather words.
Okay. So the one I chose for this week is actually a little bit cheating. Those of you who play games with me know I'm into cheating. So this, I say it's cheating because I'm actually going to talk about the Latin word first and then talk about it as an English word that we can put in our word hoard. But I'm reading through the Latin scriptures with the students in my classical conversations community, and one of them is my daughter. And I had asked them to attend to the scripture and share a word that was meaningful to them for the week. And my own daughter was the one who happened to share that day. And she shared that she saw the word ratio, rationis, which just means ratio. And And all day, I just simply wrote her word on the board. I said, okay, good. I've honored your contribution to the conversation. This is our word. And it was like the Holy Spirit descended on us. And all day long, we encountered the descendants of that little word. We talked about ratios in math and in music theory and in our chemistry equations. We were reading Hamlet that day. And so we talked about man as a rational creature and what it means to be irrational. And then in the American history, we talked about rational and irrational human behaviors and revolutions by looking at the American and French revolutions. And so our word hoard really proved to be quite a treasure that day. So I know you've been thinking about that word, particularly Leigh, in the math map.
Yeah, and even your examples would feed into the whole idea behind the math map. Notice that you compared the American to the French, rational to irrational. That's all mathematicians do when they're solving problems. They compare what's familiar and known and processes they've practiced with practices or with ideas that are unfamiliar and unknown, make the comparison and try to figure out how to either manipulate or discover or solve the thing that they don't know. And so that too all by itself is a ratio. So what's interesting to me is when you pull out a word like ratio and the examples you gave, it just helps us to think of all kinds of other ways where we can use the word ratio. So this is where I want to encourage our book club members. We're going to do a word hoard every single week. And what we'd like you to do is next week, or start contributing in the chat right now, words that you would like us to hoard and to discuss. And next week, you'll be better prepared, and we'll pause and we'll allow you to kind of add to the conversation and tell us all kinds of ideas that maybe our word hoard makes you think of. So we're looking to give you guys actually exercises and access that we can do right here without there really being homework, because we're hoping that you'll read the books and consider your own children and how you can help them with the Classical Conversations curriculum, as well as just get more inspired yourself to read books. So thanks, Jennifer, for that word hoard, and I look forward to the words that our book club contributes. Before we go on, I want to have another segment. This one's called Words Kindly Spoken. Something that you may not know is I get so much mail from people, and I'm not talking about email. I'm talking about people mailing me things and sending me things, as well as giving me gifts and letters and cards when I'm on tour. And I'm just really grateful for them. And so I want to honor the people who have spoken kindly to me throughout the years. CC families are brimming with gratitude, and I find their enthusiasm infectious. And I hope that these things that they've sent me and the words that they've given me will inspire you too. So my first one, and I hope you guys can see some of this. I'm gonna raise this up in a second, but it's from a girl who's 10 years old. I'm not gonna reveal her name for privacy, but she says, I'm 10 years old and in Foundations and Essentials, and I have uniquely crafted this shell to be one of a kind. I hope you enjoy it. Love, and her name. Look at this beautiful thing that she made me. Can you guys see it? I don't know if you can read it or not, but it says to know God and to make him known. So if you're interested in supporting our youngsters who love words, you can go to her website, Giggle Girls Co. on Etsy, Giggle Girls Co. Thanks for sending this to me. Another thing I want to show you is, and this is all just to give you ideas so that we can encourage one another. Aren't you tired of people just being negative? And our families are so encouraging. I love it when I'm on tour and I get words like this. See how big and long this is? It's from the East Orlando Classical Conversations, and they made a poster for me and everybody signed it. So thank you, East Orlando, and I hope that we'll be hearing from the parents in that community here on our Words Aptly Spoken. So did you notice these were tangible things? They weren't emailed to me. If you're interested in sending something for me to highlight on the show, particularly things your children made, feel free to send it to 255 Grant Street, West End, North Carolina, 27376. And Julie, our able producer, has got that on the PowerPoint, that address. And so we'll be showing that each week too. Okay, so we've spent the first about 10 minutes just launching this idea of talking about words and what the book club's segments are going to be. But now it's getting closer to time to include you. So let's actually begin our book club discussion. Feel free to turn on your camera and chat questions and comments. And for those of you that don't know, your chat's at the bottom of the screen. And our able producer, Julie Melendez, who I hope you'll get to know as well as you know me and Jennifer, because she's an important part of producing this book club. She's going to select some of the things that you say and some of the questions that you ask to share with all of us. So, you ready? We're still going to set it up for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to jump into the larger communities conversation. Jennifer, tell us about Old World Echoes. Tonight, we're going to discuss Old World Echoes, which is a collection of fairy tales. Why did you want to collect these stories?
Yeah, so if we go back just a minute to our quote from Postman that we talked about being people of the word, it's important for us to be keepers of the books. And it's possible that things can get lost over time. And so I felt pretty strongly that it's important to help young families have a collection of stories and poems that have nurtured families for hundreds of years. And they could just have one single place to grab it out wherever they are, on the picnic blanket, in the park, in the living room floor, in the bed, in front of the fireplace, and just open it up and have a conversation, have a read aloud and have a conversation with their family.
Yeah, we really want to keep the idea of family closeness through ancient stories and modern stories. So how did you choose the stories for Old World Echoes?
So I looked at a lot of stories before choosing the ones that are in there. And I had a few requirements. One is that I wanted them to be stories that would appeal to both boys and girls and children and adults. It was really important to me that they meet all of those qualifications so that families could be excited about them. And then I did want to not just collect up quality stories, although that was very important, but also try to capture different parts of geography. And so throughout the series, we pretty much cover all the world geography. So Old World Echoes is primarily focused on the cultures that were growing at that time, which was Europe and Asia. And then Ancient World Echoes does the more ancient civilizations, Greece and Rome and China and Africa. And then the New World Echoes is from North and South America. So we kind of hit those cultures that were flourishing at those time periods.
And a lot of the writing in there is fairy tales, myths, poetry, but in particular, I want to ask you about the fairy tales. Why should families read fairy tales?
Yeah, so I love to give both practical and philosophical reasons. The practical reason is they're short. And sometimes that really matters. If you have a student who's in, the upper high school years, they're doing a lot of work. And if you don't want to lose that family read aloud time, you might need something short. And so I would bring my older challenge students downstairs every day. And I knew that for 10, 15 minutes, we could in that time, we could read a fairy tale and have a good discussion. And then philosophically, I have some pretty big ideas that we can unpack with our participants here. But I think it's important in an age where we as Christians even we get swayed by the materialism. And I mean materialism in the sense that there's only what we can see and hear and taste and touch. And instead we need to remember that, there is a supernatural realm. And the fairy tales help us to remember that there are supernatural helpers helping us. And then lastly, that as we talked about the moral imagination at the beginning, these stories always extol virtues like gentleness, goodness, bravery, duty, and honor to one's parents. Those are the things that are rewarded in these stories.
So I don't want to ask too many good questions because we're going to have some discussion. But could you share with us, do you have a favorite story in the book?
I do. And for once, I'm not going to cheat. I really am only going to name one. And that's the French fairy tale. And it's actually called The Fairy, a fairy tale called The Fairy, which is the shortest one in the book. But I love it because it is a great depiction of the scripture that says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so the characters in this actually speak out. The good character is given the gift of speaking out jewels and flowers, and the character has a bad nature speaks out vipers and toads, and is ultimately banished from the community because it's so nasty. And I just love, that's such a great way, and it really is very, very short. It's such a great way to remind our kids that what is in us comes out of our mouths and can either bless or harm those who are around us.
There's a lot of Christian elements in fairy tales that hopefully we'll get into as we continue with our discussion. So I have some questions to help our friends listening to participate. The questions are, do you have a favorite fairy tale and why? And we're going to call in some of you chatters, so go ahead and let us know. Do any of you have what used to be called a children's hour? It was an old-fashioned word for when dinner was over and the family would sit around and listen to the radio or read a book together, or homework was done. Do you have something like that? And give us ideas for incorporating that in our family, maybe ways we can turn the TV off. And then a third one is, besides the fairy tales and the stories being in there, there's also poetry. We as moms and dads don't often talk about poetry with our children. I want to hear if any of you have really good ideas into how to incorporate the poetry that's in Old World Echoes or any other favorite poems that you have. So before we welcome our friends, though, into the conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsor, classicalconversationsbooks.com, where books discussed in the club can be purchased. We have the entire 2023 Words Aptly Spoken Book Club calendar. It's a different location. It's at leighbortins.com, and you click on the tile that says Words Aptly Spoken, and the calendar will pop down below. So you can visit that site, leighbortins.com, and plan to join as many book clubs as possible. Just show up, even if you haven't read the book. We may convince you to read the book in the future, but meanwhile, we want to hear your, your comments and your questions and chat with you too. I'm just really excited to do this. This is the one thing I do like about technology, is that people that are really good friends, that I became friends in person, I can at least connect with you. And so I appreciate you spending the time with Jennifer and I. I also want to remind you that, or let you know that next week, to keep in line with our Scribblers at Home, about to be released activity book, we're going to be discussing Exploring the Heavens with Uncle Paul. It's a Classical Conversations multimedia book where it's a read aloud about science topics, something that a lot of people aren't quick to pull off the library shelf. Okay, now it's time to include the rest of the book club. Julie, what do our book lovers want to talk about? Did we lose our beloved Julie?
No, she's muted.
I just need to unmute myself. You might take back very capable producer. No, lots of fairy tales popping up. So Baby Yaga, that's something I've never heard of. Sounds like an interesting story. Amy, do you want to share a little bit about what Baby Yaga is about?
Yeah, it was one from the Old World Echoes that I'd heard of it, but then I was rereading it the other day, and I was so impressed with how much scriptural principles are embedded in the entire story. It's kind of a Hansel and Gretel story, but one of the quotes that I loved, the stepmother progressively becomes more wicked, and she says, the storyteller says, "Do you know what it means to allow a wicked thought to enter one's heart? The wicked thought grows all the time like a poisonous plant and slowly kills the good thoughts. A wicked feeling was growing in the stepmother's heart, and she determined to send the children to the witch, thinking it would be sure enough they'd never return." And I thought, that's like James 1. It's a perfect description of how sin is like in our mind, and then it leads to death, And so I thought that that's such a nice summary. And then the whole story is about these obedient children who first go to their good grandmother who can't keep them, but she gives them the advice basically to overcome this evil of the wicked witch they're going to, with these good, like being obedient and kind and gentle and loving. And again, it was like another scriptural principle. I just thought this whole story has so much of that embedded in it, and I thought it just lent itself to lots of good conversation. So yeah, it was a nice discovery. So it was fun.
It is a Baba Yaga from
Yeah.
Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
It's I
From
think it's
Russia.
Russia.
It
Mhm,
is.
mhm.
Yep.
It's
That was
just-
nice. Well
That's
done.
beautiful.
it's great.
Good. Lisa, do you mind elaborating a little bit on it says one of the best features of poetry. I'd love to hear your insight on that for Seashell.
Yeah, I loved reading aloud with my girls when they were little. Well, and I love reading aloud with my girls now that they're old, older. They're not old, but they're in their late 20s, and so we used to read a lot of poetry because it tickles the ears and it trips over the tongue. And I had daughters that were kind of fascinated with words. My older daughter especially just loved the way that words sounded and the way they felt in her mouth. And so she had just a huge imagination, and words you could just see were painting pictures in her mind. As I would read to her, I could see all the castles and all the prairies and all the dungeons and all that she was creating in her mind. And so the poem in Old World Echoes, this is a poem from New World Echoes. One of them that I really, really loved was the seashell. And the reason that I loved it is, I just want to read it real quick because it's very short. Seashell, seashell, sing me a song, oh please, a song of ships and sailor men and parrots and tropical trees. And so when you read things like that, it's not just the words, it's all the pictures and all the possibilities that are inside of those words, not just the words that are on the page, but what else? And that was the best thing about reading with my girls when they were little, is that we could enjoy the story together. But I always ask them, what else? What else do you see? What else did that make you think of? What do you think happens next? And that was, to me, one of the best ways to expand their imagination and introduce them to the magic of stories.
So Lisa, did the pirate Don Dirk of Dowdy make it into Scribblers?
Yes, it
Okay.
is, because it's so perfect. Yes, it's
Yeah.
there. It's there.
So even for boys having the four sons, when anything was talked about like beauty or handsome or whatever, I would always chirp up with the pirate Don Dirk of Dowdy was as handsome could be.
Yeah.
And the various parts of that. I think they like that we love words.
Yes, they do. And it helps them have an appreciation and a love of words. And I actually think that stories and poems help our children learn to savor words. They don't just eat them up and pass by. They take them in and they taste them and they let them roll around on their tongue and they find a new way to use them. And that's what it means to savor a word. And you can't do that unless you practice again and again and taste over and over.
And it'll taste good like God's word too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, and your story about your poem too, Leigh, also illustrates. So I talked at the beginning about how, we can bind all of humanity together with our shared stories, but it's also true at the level of our families. So for you, the pirate Don Dirk of Dowdy became a shorthand for your family. You had, that was part of what bound your family together, your culture. I love that.
Good. Well,
That's
and those are
beautiful.
all examples of words. You said savor, Lisa. So those are just examples of, things we want to hear from you to contribute. So not just the words for us to hoard, but the story behind it and why the word just tickles your delight or glorifies God or just made your family stronger, whatever the reason you love it.
That's beautiful. Good. Well, I'm going to try and call on Mary Newcomb to share her beautiful daughters. I know, Mary, are you still on? Would you like to share about yours?
I just realized I could start
Mm.
my video. Did I start my video really?
I don't know if your video's on, but I can hear you. There you go. It's a little bit lagging your audio, but so maybe.
Hello, Julie.
Hi.
Okay, I might not have done it completely right. Let me stop my video and maybe that'll help it because
That will
you can
help.
hear me
Perfect.
better.
Yes.
Mufan's okay. Mufar's Beautiful Daughters is one that I loved in a play at school, and so it just came alive to me. And I have always gone back to the thoughts of it and gotten it from the library many times for my own children. Just those pieces of people aren't who they seem, and it's really that scripture of when the rich man comes in and the poor man comes in. If you treat the rich man better than the poor man, what are you doing? And that's what the story of Mufara's Beautiful Daughter is there's one daughter who's mean and one daughter who's kind, and the daughter who is mean refuses to help the one on the side who needs help, like a Good Samaritan type of moment. And the one who is kind and caring and stops and helps finds out that this is a very rich prince, and she marries him, and her whole life changes for the better because she chose kindness. And so it's always just been a very favorite of mine, and set in Africa. It's just a beautiful, beautiful illustrations as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. I'm trying to look at the chat. I'm trying to look at the chat.
Well,
Julie.
I'm intrigued by Timothy Knotts. He said Shel Silverstein. So am I remembering that is Where the Sidewalk Ends guy?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I remembered something from elementary school. That is amazing. I was not classically educated. Timothy, do you want to talk a little bit about those? T.S. Eliot's poems sound intriguing as well.
Yeah, so he has some other poems, but the naming of cats, right? Old possums are such delightful little. I mean, they're stories, so they do two things at once, right? They tell the little story, the little vignette, as well as having some beautiful words, and of course some lovely word play. He's so good at that, at making sort of near rhymes and things that just tickle you. And Shel Silverstein's sort of the same way. His poems are short and pithy, sometimes a little touching, or making a little bit of a point. So they provide some good fodder for conversation, mixed in with a lot of just fun. I think another of my wife's favorite that I didn't mention is Jack Prelutsky. She loves Jack Prelutsky's poems for our little ones. They're just very accessible, but provide such a nice on-ramp into poetry where it's not scary and it's not, but it's also not always trite. It can be something more. So then I always try and follow that up with a little bit of something that's the next step. So we're not jumping all the way straight to like Shelley or something that's incomprehensible. But like Robert Frost, where again, it's capturing something that they maybe can picture. They might have to work at it a little more, or have a little help getting from point A to point B. But then they walk away feeling like they've accomplished something, and it's still only a page or two long.
Hey, Timothy, tell us what a near rhyme is, if you can think of an example.
Yeah, so like, for example, one of my favorite of the T.S. Eliot poems is of the awful battle of the peaks and the pollicles. What is it? Together with some account of the great Rumpus Cat, the intervention of the great Rumpus Cat, I think it's like the longest title. But there's this battle between the Pekingese and the pollicle dogs, and they bark and bark and bark at each other. And then the great Rumpus Cat appears out of nowhere. And it says, when suddenly up from a basement flat, who should stalk out but the great Rumpus Cat? his eyes were like fireballs, fearfully blazing, and he gave a great yawn, and his jaws were amazing. So I guess that's actually probably is an actual rhyme in my mind. When I started that, it wasn't. But one of those ones where it doesn't quite fit the strictest sense of rhyme, but it's close, and it gives the kids that sense of freedom to know that they can generate poems without being so stuck with counting syllables and making sure that every consonant and vowel are perfectly the same. And I like that. It gives them that latitude that then they can grow into more if they want to.
That actually sounds like my 4-year-old granddaughter's poems. Nearly rhymes.
Yeah.
They're precious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad you brought up that particular collection of people, Tim, because sometimes we get so concerned in homeschooling our children that we forget to have fun. And all of the people you named are loads and loads of fun. And that should be part of building the family culture around stories and poems too. Just because you mentioned Shel Silverstein, I have to share that from that glorious year of being in the rowboat, I also remember one of the poems, and I won't recite the whole thing, but just enough so that you can see how fun Shel Silverstein is. I'll just do the beginning and the end. I'm sick, said Peggy Ann McKay. I cannot go to school today. I have the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps. And then at the end, after listing all of her ailments, and it goes on for a long time, she says, what? What's that you say? You say today is Saturday? Goodbye. I'm going out to play.
I love that one.
So you gotta have fun too with your family. So
that's great. Well, I know, go ahead, Leigh. You asked another question, kind of how families utilize this. I don't know if that's a question to answer now or just for families to think about it.
You can ask that. I'm happy to hear. I mean, do it. You can chat if you don't want to really answer, but do you go out of your way to have a kind of literature hour, children's hour, a family hour, where your sole job is what you're doing now?
We did that. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I'll just answer very briefly, then you can jump in, Lisa. We do it usually twice a day. My wife will do it with my kids as part of their morning time together. And again, we have a couple of challenge age kids and a couple of foundations age kids. So they will do some reading from one of the Echoes books, or I think they're working through Kings of Rome right now. But then I also tend to read to them in the evening. So after dinner time, while we're sitting at the table, and often we'll pull out a book, often something longer, but usually intermixed with some shorter stuff that is more accessible for the younger kids too.
We used to do it twice a day at least too, Tim. Even when the girls were really little, we would read before nap time. We would read in the afternoon. We always read in the morning because we did devotion together. So we read scripture together, and then we found something like Hind's Feet on High Places or A Child's Pilgrim's Progress. And so we read that together, and then we read before nap time. But at night, we also either read, sometimes we would listen to music together and ask them what story the music told. But sometimes we would read books together, and it would give them stories that they would finish when they went to sleep. I discovered early on that one of the ways to keep them thinking happy thoughts as they went to sleep, instead of worrying about something from the day or something that might never come or something scary that might go bump in the night, was to give them happy thoughts and a story. And so we read at night, and then when they went upstairs, we would give them 3 happy thoughts to go to sleep on, and remind them of one of the stories we had read during the day, and say, this is your story, now you finish it. And that was a winsome way to share stories with them and to kind of boost their creativity.
Yeah, I appreciate the intentionality both of you share. Lisa, I know your children are grown. Tim, how old's your oldest, Tim?
She's 14.
Yeah, you're not quite there yet. But Lisa, I wonder if you can connect any of that intentionality to now that you're a grandma and Stephanie's a writer, and do you think that made a difference, or were they going to be the readers to their children and writers for the world? Because that's how the Lord made them.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Lord made Stephanie with that bent. Although her first word was book, because we read to her all the time, and she would follow. My dad used to laugh when he would come to visit, because she would follow me around when I was doing chores or whatever, and she would just say constantly, read me this book. And it amused him to no end that I would just drop wherever I was in the floor and put her in my lap and read the book. And so I think that she connected being loved and having attention on demand and reading. It was all wrapped up together. And so that became something really special to her, and her imagination grew as the stories grew. And I think that she dictated her first story to me before she knew how to write. She didn't know how to make the letters. But that quickly got old when her sister was born. And so I had to teach her, these are the sounds that the letters make, so she could write her own books while she was going around. But I think she was meant to be a writer. My younger daughter, who's the mother of my first perfect grandchild, she loved stories as well, but not as much. She's not as much of a reader on her own as her sister is. But she and her husband read to Gideon every night, and have been since he's been a few weeks old. And that child at 6 months old will sit on your lap and listen to the story. And she is training him to love words and to love the sound of a voice that is giving him attention. And so I do think that readers and writers are both created by God, but nurtured into being by their parents and the habits of the home.
I have a question for Stephanie Harris, if you don't mind answering it. You used the phrase morning basket for your family reading time. Where did that come from? I like that, the morning basket.
So that came from, we have like a little wicker basket that we have in our living room, and it has different quiet activities that the kids can do while I'm reading out loud, whether it's like coloring or yarn and arty stuff or anything like that that they can do on their own quietly, not with each other, while they're listening. And so in that basket we put different stories, or maybe different like little games or something that we can play together afterwards. We just kind of set that time aside just for that morning basket.
What a great phrase. Anybody else have a name for your time? It's okay if you didn't.
While they're gathering their thoughts, Leigh, I do want to say
Together time. Yep.
yeah, that's good, Julie. I just want to give a little bit of encouragement for maybe moms of boys. My firstborn loved stories but didn't like to sit. And so one day I was reading to him outside, and he was riding a scooter in tight circles around me. And I thought, this feels wrong. I feel like he should be sitting still. And so I was reading a long novel to him. I think it may have been Wizard of Oz, and he was probably 6. And I said, okay, son, you're making me a little dizzy. I'm going to ask you a few questions. And he just blah, 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 told me back the whole story. And I thought, well, I guess we're going to scooter while we're reading. and it's a joy to me now that he's not a reader of fiction the way I am, but he's 23 now, and he's started to ask me to go back to some of the books he read in Challenge. Now that he's more mature, and he feels like he's ready for some of them. So that's been kind of fun this year as we're going back through some of his Challenge literature.
Thank you. So thanks to all of you for this, just joining us on our first book club. We'll get better at it, and more of us will join, and we'll all be more prepared for the next one. but we only have a couple minutes left. So before we all sign off, Jennifer, I really enjoyed the discussion. Do you have a takeaway that you want to share? What did you get out of tonight?
Well, obviously I just love being with everyone talking about stories. So but I think just going back to Amy's quotation from the Baba Yaga, I'm finding more that I like to mark up my books and I highlight things that are important to me, either with pencil if I have that handy, or a blue pen if I have that handy. And I'm finding more often that the fairy tales have just as many quotations in them as a Dickens novel of things that I want to store away. So I appreciated you sharing that one with me so that I can mark it in blue. So thanks, Amy.
Yes, and so thanks to all of you. We enjoyed spending the time with you. Let's keep the conversations going and see you next week. Thank you for helping, Julie.
You are welcome. See y'all next week. Invite your friends to come.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Or stay on. Come back at 8. We have a good discussion.